Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everybody. We are now live. This is Eddie Doyle hosting Marc Ashworth today. And so Marc and I had a little bit of a preamble prior to the session here. We're meeting for the very first time. And I love these discussions. And the reason why is because I'm going to get to know you in the next half an hour, 45 minutes. And then so is the rest of the world, potentially. So this is absolutely wonderful. It's an Ask Me Anything session. So please come in. For those of you that are now joining live, we've just got a few numbers starting. Please ask questions, comments, jump in, have opposing views. Let's have a discussion and enjoy ourselves. Now, Marc, let's start. Please introduce yourself. Give us kind of the 30-second rundown of what you're currently doing. And then I'm likely going to go back in time to, I always love asking these kinds of questions. How did you get to where you are today, right? So where are you today?
All right. Well, I am based out of the St. Louis area and with First Bank, which is one of the largest family-owned banks in the nation. And I'm their Chief Information Security Officer for them, and been with them now for just past 5 years. I hit my 5-year mark in September. And so, happy to be here. And, we're in 5, 6, 7 states,
Okay.
in part in, mortgages, but half of our bank branches are in California. And then also the other half is in Missouri and Illinois. So we're pretty large. Obviously, we're not the largest, but we're bank out there. But we're definitely in that top 175, 170, 180 banks in the nation out of about 4,500 in the U.S. So we're definitely fairly large. So
let's say a thumbs up back to Miguel, a wonderful friend and colleague. Thanks for joining us here, Miguel. He's a security engineer. And one of the things I've noticed, you can tell by my deft, New Jersey accent, that I'm not from around here, right? So I grew up in England. I spent most of my adult life in Canada. And you've got maybe 3 or 4 banks to choose from across the entire nation.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And so one of the things I loved and observed when I came to the United States is that, of course, you've got competition. You've got which creates better service, and of course you've and of course that creates much better products for consumers, for people across the US. So the US got that one right. That's really cool. Okay, well, wonderful. So as the Chief Information Security Officer for a bank, what are some of the things like you're dealing with? Like, what are the threat actors doing? What are they looking for? Let's start really broad, and then we'll tunnel in from there.
Okay, so give you a little bit more perspective. I have the cyber side, and then I have 3 other groups underneath me. So I have physical side as well. So all the physical security of the bank reports up to me. I also have the fraud side. So I see, the fraud within the bank transactions and everything that happens. And then I also have networking. And so the networking and cyber teams work really close together with one another. So, from what we see, a bank perspective, if you look at, since, this is more of a technology related podcast, but, with Checkpoint as the sponsor, great products, by the way, love them. And, but we see a lot of the external scanning that's taking place, that we see, especially in the last year, we've seen a lot of activity from Russia happening. And, it had a little bit of a downward spill during the initial time of the invasion. And we actually saw a couple days before the actual invasion of Ukraine happened, we actually saw a dramatic drop, and then it stayed down low, and then it slowly started itching its way back up, which I thought was very interesting.
In what? This is really interesting. So
yeah, so in scans, a lot of the general scans that's coming from Russia, they're constantly scanning, looking for a way in with everyone, and much like a lot of other noise, that's happening from China, from even from the U.S., which are probably more bots that are out there that are scanning and is being controlled by either some other state actor or even some criminal organization that's constantly scanning it. It's kind of it's really that kind of background noise that's happening on the internet throughout the time, but they're constantly looking for things. But we saw a lot of that coming from Russian IP addresses And then a couple days before the Ukraine invasion, that like dropped off to zero. I want not zero, but really low compared to how they were.
They're preoccupied with something else now.
Yeah.
How do you detect their scans? I think what you mean is if somebody's trying a port, you see that someone's knocking on the door, right?
Yep.
So you have technology to see people knocking on the door, and you obviously just ignore it. This is not somebody you want to invite into your home.
Right.
Really?
Yeah. So since we're not global, we're able to, do a lot of geo blocking. Is really what's happening. And so we geo block like a lot of companies do. And so those denies are what we're looking at, and we're looking for trends that's occurring to where if we start seeing a large ramp up coming from a certain country or anything, then we can kind of see what are they looking to do? Where are they trying? Are they looking for specific ports or protocols or, and then we can kind of sometimes start seeing, okay, well, this is happening. Let's start watching the phishing fronts and the BEC attempts and those sort of things to see, are we seeing also another pattern of additional spam emails and other emails that's coming in? And sometimes they correlate and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just looking. And the other thing is if there's a big vulnerability that has been released, like a check or like a Microsoft Exchange issue, or I don't know, Chrome or whatever it might be, do those correlate with the scans and the ports that they're looking for and everything? So you can kind of see sometimes that correlation between, what's being out there in the press, or maybe something that's preceding an announcement that's happening, because all of a sudden, say port, I don't know, 25 is getting hit really hard all of a sudden. And then a few days later, there's an announcement of an Exchange, issue, okay, well, that might, they're out there generally looking to see, can they talk to an Exchange server out there somehow?
I find it fascinating that, in a sense, you sort of got the heads up on the invasion of the Ukraine. I mean,
we didn't know what was happening, but we were like, wow, this is interesting.
Happening.
And then after we went back and started looking, it was like, oh, wow, 2 days before, bam, here's happened. And then as what we've seen is as they started to lose progression, on the physical side, they started ramping up more on the cyber side.
And you saw that because there were less attacks to the US, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Fascinating. So there's a great tip, ladies and gentlemen. Always talk to a CISO. They'll know about World War III before anyone else will.
Let's hope not. But let's hope it didn't happen at all. But yeah.
Yeah, because obviously, the GRU was then focusing their efforts on the Ukraine. And, this is mind-blowing to me, Mark. I don't know. I'd love your opinion on this, your personal opinion, of course. Actually, where's my little ticker? I need to put it back on there. So your personal opinion on the following, which is, when Zelensky first received all these cyber attacks from Russia, he made an international appeal, because obviously they're a smaller country, they don't have the technology, they don't have the people, they don't have, obviously the weapons and all these kinds of things. He made an appeal, said, can you help me with the cyber fight, just to the global community? Within 1 week, 200,000 people signed up to an encrypted Telegram account. It got up to about 450,000 people, and I just sort of lost interest in counting. But what really blew my mind is that private citizens, big, powerful private citizens, have weighed in on war for a long time, right? So obviously Elon Musk gave him the internet for free. It's like, boom, there you go. Right. They turned it off. Well, I'll turn it back on. Wow, that alone is unbelievable. But even going back to World War II, there are private corporations, IBM, for example, that certainly profited. I mean, look at life, and weighed in on these wars. But never before in history have I seen citizenry. So, guy in the basement, right? Yeah, I'll sign up for this. 450,000 people and weighing in, and it's like, It's interesting because I find it really dangerous, right? It's just, we've picked a side, and okay, fine. I'm not saying people shouldn't pick a side. And obviously some people, not many in our world, are picking a side of Russia, but it just blows my mind a bit, because what do you know about war?
Right.
Right? It's like, who are you in the basement here studying? And these groups, they were very quite effective. I remember they took down a media chain, a bunch of grocery stores in Russia. You know, what are your thoughts on that? And let me just quickly, before you answer, Miguel, what are you saying there, my friend? You're saying interesting, use AI to predict a cyber event. That's interesting, right? Can you imagine if you scrubbed for anonymity, Mark, took the data you're seeing, Russia, the GRU is really quiet. Everybody else makes the same conclusion into one repository, and you go, oh, now, Miguel, you're absolutely right there. LinkedIn, this is Sana. Thank you very much for joining us. Sana saying, very relevant to the CXOs I work with in transforming workforce and organization with automated AI. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Just your personal opinion on people weighing into war. I mean, maybe this is the new way forward in history. I don't know.
Yeah, it's if you think about it, it's a different militia than before, because now,
right.
yeah, because in the past, someone invades everything, the countryman comes up, and they have their militia to help protect their country, and that was happening in the Ukraine as well. They were helping the Ukrainian military, fight Russians, but it's different, I think, in the cyber side, because now it's not just your countrymen; it's people globally, and there's a lot of people that came in and really helped, like what you were talking about. So I think it's very interesting, and I think it also shows how hacktivists, which is really what was happening, can be waged to be on one side or the other, and it was happening on the other side too. Don't forget, because there were Russian sympathizers as well that was doing attacks against Ukraine, and other countries that were speaking up against Ukraine or against Russia. So it was happening on both sides, and it was happening globally, and that part's really interesting. And it shows you how quickly the physical and the cyber world can really collide pretty heavily, and the impact that can, because there were Russian government sites that were taken down very quickly, and a lot of other ISPs and everything else that was all being affected by it. So it can be really disruptive in this environment right now, I think, and and since it's all dispersed, and it makes it easier to do, and and it makes it more difficult to protect, from the government side too.
Yeah, that's right. There are so many implications with this, Mark. You used a great word just now, militia. I wasn't thinking of it that way. And then, of course, you have the soldiers of fortune. I remember years ago, I took my family down to Belize to do a little, snorkeling trip. And Belize City, this is like, they're everywhere because guns are coming in from interior, right? Drugs are being smuggled out, guns are coming in from the coast. So you see these massive soldiers, all ex-military type, all these Black Ops types that we used in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So isn't that interesting? Kind of like Miguel's point on the AI. These groups, because they're free right now, these 400,000, 500,000, 600,000 people, whatever the number is.
Right.
They're doing this voluntarily because they believe, let's say, whatever it is they believe in this cause. There's a real irony there. I have to point it out. I'm sorry that it might hurt people that are listening to this down the road. But Ukraine, prior to this, was well known as one of the most corrupt countries around. And it's like, so just be careful who you're supporting. This is why I'm on the fence. I mean, I'm not obviously committing, and that's a very luxurious position to be in, but I'm taking the position of the observer, because at some point, because they're very effective, this militia could turn into an actual group that says, great, we're for hire. Right? We can coordinate these efforts for hire. I just want to take a look at what Keely is coming in and saying, love that Mark mentioned the militia. Yeah, exactly, Keely. Keely's a colleague of mine. Thank you, Keely. It's great of you to turn up as correlation. Exactly what you were thinking. So here's the next step, because I know quite a few companies. So I'm in New Jersey, right? So I'm next to some of these monstrous outfits that have tens of thousands of employees. And a few companies put out a memo and said, hey, this went out by Zelensky to say a call for help. Hey, cyber department, no, you're not getting involved. Because what are the legal implications of that? Let's say you're at your desk. You know, you're some kid, you're 25, you think it's a great cause, whatever. So you start tapping away, but you're doing it from the IP address of a bank. I imagine you, the CISO, you're not going to be happy with that. What are the legal implications behind that? The compliance officer has to weigh in on this conversation. And so, it's so easy to make keystrokes and not feel the consequence of them from the air-conditioned room that we keystroke in, right?
Yep.
So there's an issue there. Talking of compliance then, and you mentioned you also have fraud with which is, I imagine, physical fraud as well as cyber fraud in your world. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And Miguel being a good colleague, saying hello. So talk to me about compliance just in general. What are your thoughts around what are the biggest challenges for a CISO with compliance? Let's start there.
Yeah, with all the different regulations that's coming up, especially around privacy of data, that's constantly changing. And CCPA was really kind of the first to really hit a lot of companies in the U.S. that were not global already. I'll put that caveat. Your Facebooks and JP Morgans that are global had to face GDPR and everything. But as far as CCPA, that affected a lot of other companies that dealt with California or have a large web presence and selling. And so getting those regulations in place and it was a sizable effort for, I think, a lot of companies. And then also the instability of the regulation to some degree, because there was a lot of clarification that had to happen, and it was waiting for that to happen to really kind of narrow down things. But then since then, a lot of other states have brought up other privacy related regulations.
New York, right?
Yeah, Texas and Colorado,
really? Texas is in
Washington.
Really? Oh, wow. Yeah.
So there's a lot of other regulations that's coming up that in various areas, and biometrics is one. So Illinois has had kind of the flagship biometrics regulation that a lot of other states are using as an example. And so, how are you dealing with that? And, can you take pictures of people? And, all that really comes into play. And we have a great privacy team that and compliance team that I work with really heavy. And, so we stay involved and talk a lot because of, just things where things are working out and where things are going. And then looking at it from a technology side to make sure we stay compliant with that. And then also, as we are looking to do new things in technology, to make sure that we keep those things in mind and build that into that technology as we go to do it.
So when people like the SEC in March of this year, they came out with, I'll butcher it a little bit, my words, you need to check on your supply chain when it comes to cyber, right? This was from SolarWinds and the pipeline, right? Colonial, right? So they said from now onwards, you can't just show us, and this is for publicly traded company. So that doesn't affect you, does it?
No, but that will drive into the private companies on what happens. And, once you get one agency, whether it's the SEC or the Federal Reserve or OCC or whoever, once they kind of start going, then they all start to adapt it. And so that sometimes a precursor of what's going to happen in your industry, for us. So,
well, it's a great level for best practice, right, for the private corporations. So for the ladies and gentlemen listening, what I was mentioning there was in March of this year, the SEC basically said this: it's not good enough that you have to through the Federal Trade Commission, et cetera, demonstrate that, let's say, the organization that Mark belongs to, you obviously, as a bank, we're custodians of people's money and massive amounts of it, and organizations that are always being attacked, show us that you've got great cybersecurity. So that's what the SEC said to publicly traded companies. But now what they're saying, because of supply chain attacks, show us that you have vetted your supply chain. So listen to this, Mark. This blew my mind. I was talking to, and I can't reveal these guys right now, so just excuse the fact that it's, I'm going to dance around who it is. But there's a chip manufacturer, publicly traded company, and they have suppliers from around the world. These suppliers fly into the US and then they walk the floor, it's called. So they're on the actual, where the chips are being made, highly sensitive areas. Not just physically, because you've got to keep them very, very clean. There's a lot of physical security. You own physical rights, you can imagine. But also, don't be walking in with the USB sticks and your smartphones. You're not even allowed to bring them on the floor when you walk the floor, because there's such sensitive areas with all the intellectual property, and there's so much industrial espionage going on. So what they've now said to the actual chip manufacturer, the big outfit, to these suppliers, if your people, and there was a European company that is supporting them with, I don't know what they do, they provide some widget for them, right? But they actually banned them from walking the floor. Now, what's interesting for the European company is it sets them at a competitive disadvantage, because I'm sure they're not the only company that supplies widget, right? Lots of other companies can supply widget, but now their employees are not allowed to go and have physical communication, that one-on-one conversation, and get right in there and test and study and analyze these chipsets. And so what a punishment, really interesting. And that came down from that SEC regulation saying, you better watch out for your supply chain. And this outfit's doing it, so good for them. But anyway, that's the impact in the real world for the listeners, right? If you don't, and if you don't look at your supply chain, and we'll talk about that actually, I'd like to understand, you could be in trouble. Do you look at your supply chain? And if you do, how are we examining supply chain?
Yeah, so we thoroughly examine all of our vendors as we, are onboarding new ones. And then we have our, top 30 vendors that we work with that we, do, regular reviews with them. But, they, when they're onboarding, depending on what the vendor is, they, the security team has a whole, bunch of questions they ask, for them, or we do financial reviews. And so there's definitely a very thorough vetting process that we go through and that we keep up with. You mentioned, the chip maker. I was in manufacturing prior to this. And one of the things, whenever the Google Glass came out, we had to change all of our policies off of it because, our HR guy comes in with Google Glass and it's like, no, you can't have that in there. Right. And so, we had to change that, and we started banning, cell phones in the manufacturing areas. And, because we were doing, defense and FDA, and, we have medical devices and everything else. And, they couldn't, in our engineering areas and lab areas and all that sort of stuff, we had to ban all that and have that as a formal policy to make sure that someone didn't do that. And even, we were regularly audited by, the big aircraft manufacturers, and, the same thing applied to them, which they were okay with because they had, top secret stuff that they had worked on, or, in their facilities. So they, that's been banned for them for, decades. But, it was newer to the smaller suppliers to have to, be thinking that level too. So.
Right. I'm just going to bring Sanna's jumping in. Thank you, Sanna. So sweet to see you here. Sanna's a friend. Lovely. Great area to highlight, supply chain. Yeah, actually, I don't know what business you're in, Sanna, but exactly. It's something that is becoming increasingly vetted because of these. And I tell you what, with Google Glass, I don't want anybody at my office wearing Google Glass. We can go into the washroom. Right. This is like, this is not cool.
The privacy side of it on top of it, not just the intellectual property side. So.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned this is really interesting. You just nailed it, and we're gonna dig in here. You mentioned because we do financial reviews. Okay, yes. Now this is what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You're a CISO, right? This is where I think the department of the CISO, so everybody in that department, and really the discipline of cybersecurity needs to mature a little bit. I mean, here's what I mean. This is a little on the nose, but here's what I mean. Let's take, we got to bring it up, Joe Sullivan. All right, let's take the Joe Sullivan case. So for those that are unaware who are listening today, Joe Sullivan is a CISO, first CISO, I think, to be prosecuted and found guilty of a crime. I think he's the first CISO. And, there's a fair bit of tribalism in LinkedIn and all over the kind of, social media right now saying, let's support Joe. I get that. That's, sort of lovely that he's got lots of friends. Great. But here's what's, and here's what Joe did. I'll just give you a tiny bit of background and then we'll get into my question. So what happened is Uber were hacked quite a few years ago. Joe's job is really not to cover up a hack and really not to take responsibility for it either. This is why people cover this nonsense up. It's not his fault. I mean, that's a hell of a thing for me to say. It's like, it is your responsibility to defend the company. But I'll tell you what, if you're an Uber, and if there's any, and this wasn't a nation state, but if there's any nation state attacking you, they're gonna get in. This is what we have to say publicly to take the pressure off of CISO's backs. We have to say to people who aren't in cybersecurity, if you're standing against a nation state attack, good luck. They're gonna get in. So now the question is really, how do you mitigate the damage to the least amount? So anyway, unfortunately, Joe lied to the FTC. He didn't tell his general counsel. Maybe he told Travis, the former CEO. He was a bit of a wild character. So, and what he did is he took $100,000 to pay off the hackers, called it about a bug bounty program, and didn't reveal that they had lost tens of millions of driving licenses and all this data. So beyond poorly handled, it was criminal. So, and hence he was found guilty. All right, that's the Joe Sullivan story. But back to what you mentioned. You said, yes, we do all sorts of financial reviews, and you passed over that real quick, and then you went into all the technology stuff, which of course you're responsible for. Now, the world of the CFO has been under great scrutiny and regulation for decades. The world of the CEO, great scrutiny. If you lie as a CFO, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, if you lie as a general counsel, if you lie as a CEO, that's purgatory. You're committing perjury. And that's a jailable offense for lawyers and general counsels. Now, CISOs, if we want to have, and I say we, I'm, cybersecurity strategist, if we want to have a seat at the big kids table, we have to also raise our standards. We can't be lying to the Federal Trade Commission, right? We can't act like Joe did. So financial reviews are something that's been going on, I think, forever, right? Yeah. So I say it's about time that we have these cyber reviews, right? And okay, well, so now what do we do? So we've got regulatory telling us you need to have these kinds of standards. I think there are lots of different standards. Are there lots of different standards in the financial world? Probably, right? Yeah, Sarbanes-Oxley and all the rest of it, right? All the ISO standards. Okay, so it's the same nightmare there as it has become over here, because I find that really bizarre. I must admit, wouldn't it be nice if we could all agree on a standard? But I guess that just doesn't happen, because if it hasn't happened in finance, then it's not going to happen. So I can drop that, that request. Yeah. So I suppose it's just a comment on my observation, right? That the department of the CISO now is not just now, but certainly has to step into these standards as seriously as a CFO has with all the Sarbanes-Oxleys and the ISOs, right?
Yeah, the way I look at it is, when you become a CISO, you are an officer of the company, right? And so if you don't want to be in that position, then don't apply for it. But it comes down to your integrity. And so the thing, Joe Sullivan, he made lots of mistakes, when it comes down to it, he did, he tried to cover things up. He tried to, he tried to pay people off and all that sort, and try to hide it to his executives and then to, the government, everything else. And that's just bad. There was, the integrity was lost, his, and when you are in this position, you're representing the company, but yet you're also representing yourself, and you have to do the right thing. And the right thing is you have to report it. You have to be upfront. You don't go and hide things off of it. You don't shove it under the table, that sort of stuff, And so I know there's a lot of people like, yay, Joe, or, supporting Joe off of it. But when you really look at it and you really think about it, he covered stuff up. So you shouldn't do that. And he broke the laws by doing things and the regulations and everything that he, was supposed to do. And so, if if you do the right thing, you're following your regulations, you report things as you're supposed to, then you should be okay off of this. And that's where the support really should come in. And that's where the, I can't think of the word right now, but, just where the, you're being accountable for what you're doing. And if you mess up, you should be held accountable. I hope I never mess up or doing, there's people makes mistakes, but then there's a difference between making mistakes and covering things up.
Yeah.
And okay, they're, the thing about it, hackers, they have all the time in the world, and they have the patience to continuously hit on your systems and wait until they find a way in. And so as long as you realize that, and as long as you educate your boards about that, your executives, they're, it can happen. And it just takes one mistake and they are in, and potentially within seconds. Now, how far they get in is going to depend on all your other controls. And that's what you need to put in is the controls. One area fails. But, it's the job of the CISO to identify that risk and to educate the other executives, for that. And so if there's a risk around a particular system, it's the job of the CISO to find that risk and to communicate that risk. And then it's the owner of that system to accept whether that risk is acceptable or not. And that's where it really comes to, I don't own the system, but I'm going to identify what that system's risk is and that there's a problem with that. And if you, Eddie, accept that risk, okay, well, here, you sign there. You accept that risk that, it could be a risk to the organization at that point.
Right.
And that's how it should be working. And if all things work well, and, ultimately everyone's responsible for the risk because it's everyone's responsible for security when it comes down to it. And so it's not just the CISO that's responsible for it. It's everyone's responsible for the security of it. It's just the CISO's job and security team's job to point it out and maybe provide a solution for it. And then, whoever owns that application or that system is ultimately
exactly. That's right. It comes down to the individual owners. I want to get to a few comments here because we've got quite a few coming in and a question. And so let's have a look here. LinkedIn user on this side, but I think this is Sana again, who is saying, great high. Oh yeah, we already looked at that one. Automation. Yes, Sana, if we can automate a lot of this stuff, I think that would be very, very fantastic as a Venn diagram area with AI. Sana, let's go into business, girl. Let's go. Come on. We just got the winner right there. So let's, Colin, thank you very much for joining us. Colin Middle, a lot of shadow IT is what we're concerned with here and what we're talking about. So it says supply chain plays into the idea of vicarious liability with cyber insurance. Right. Thank you for bringing that up. We'll talk about cyber insurance in a moment, perhaps. If your supplier is dirty, you have some level of liability for your own environment. Yeah, let's just call it a gray area, not because it's intentionally gray, because I think we're building the plane as we fly in technology, never mind in just cyber, but in technology in general. This is likely Sana again. Yep, it is. Yep, saying it's definitely an area of caution cautious forward movement for automation and AI in general. Miguel is jumping in here saying it's about risk and how you manage it. Right. Talking about what you just mentioned there. We got a question coming up by Colin in just a moment, Colin, so sit right there because we're going to answer that. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've got any more questions, this is your time to ask. Mark has given us an hour of his time. Very grateful. So let's go for it and ask questions. Just to feedback on what you were saying there, you said it's about educating the board on that. The individual people who own the individual technologies, are part of that shared risk. I like to say this to people outside of cyber. You've heard this one before, right? It's a threat actor, and you sort of said this in other words, a threat actor only needs to be right once, and there's no consequence for being wrong 99% of the time, or even 100% of the time, right? There's no consequence. There's a little bit of electricity and some keystrokes, right? Yeah. And so, but a CISO has to be right 100% of the time, and there's massive penalty for being wrong once.
Yep.
So, this is why I say that no one is impervious to this, right? If somebody wanted to hack me, I work for a very secure company. I'm very paranoid. I tighten everything down, right?
Yeah.
If a real smart person, a real strong person, they would. I can't be arrogant and say that wouldn't happen. And then just to finish off on Sullivan, I used to have this lovely boss. Shout out to Leslie Canning from a few years ago. She would say to me, "You're never wrong doing the right thing."
Right.
It's just so simple. Like, just if you can't tell the truth, at least don't lie,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what you get in trouble for. If you can't
Exactly.
tell the truth, just plead the fifth. I mean, that's why it's there.
Yeah.
To stop you from lying if there's something so egregiously difficult that you can't speak the truth. You just take the fifth. It's perhaps you could say it's cowardly, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's better than lying anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Well,
Colin,
and to get back to your comment about the state actors and stuff, when it comes down to it, our own government can't keep the other state actors out. So how can a business going to be able to do it?
right.
Some of the biggest companies in the world hasn't been able to keep the state actors out. So, how can a family-owned business or a mom and pop business, out there that doesn't even have it, how can they do it? So there's no one is safe when it comes to cyber, and it's just a matter of time.
Right. And it's also an unfair equation because guess what? We've got all the money, right? The attacks are coming this way to the Western world, mostly the United States, and then, Canada, Australia, England, some European countries, but the attacks are going this way, right? So it's just an unfair battle. At any rate, Colin, okay, let's go. So Colin would like our thoughts perhaps on SEC advice rule on bringing the CISO into the boardroom. How important is that for culture, transparency, and the direction of the organization, whether publicly traded or not? What are your thoughts there, Mark? Great question. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, so I'm part of a large CISO group here in the St. Louis area, and that's been the last 6 months a big topic for all of us. And from our perspective, from the CISO's perspective, it's a great thing. Because now, it's having backing by the SEC and the government that says you need to have cyber as really a risk pillar to the organization and really have knowledge of that at the board level. And whether that is, your actual CISO, regularly sitting on the board to bring up risk and everything there, or you're having an independent director, which might be a CISO from another company, and it may not be a CISO, but someone with that cyber experience that's on there. So from a career perspective, I think it's a really good thing, but also from a business perspective, my group that I'm part of, we also think that it's a very good thing because obviously we're living it, we're seeing it, we're communicating it to, as many people as we can at the executive level and the board. I give board presentations to our company and I meet regularly. Actually, today I meet with the members of the board and the executives and stuff to talk risk. And so, some companies are very out there and very in tune to that. And fortunately, First Bank is very much so because finance is a risk. Based company in general. So cyber is definitely a major risk for that. And so we talk about it a lot, but other companies that might not be the case because they're, until they actually get hit by something, maybe a ransomware attack, it's not something that maybe a lot of them are thinking of. And so with this ruling, it's bringing it back up to that board level and to that senior, executive level. And putting it right there in front of them that, you have to be considering cyber as a risk to your organization. And then, as this continues to grow, which I believe, I don't know, I saw stats, something like 20% of, of the traded companies or, new board members or independent board directors are CISOs or cyber professionals that's been added, over this past year or two. So hopefully that trend continues and it just makes more awareness, and having that awareness at the top pushes the controls down at the bottom.
That's right.
And so that's going to, hopefully help reduce risk overall for organizations as it becomes more aware, budgets comes up and, more controls are getting in place, less, criminals are getting in. from the outside, and hopefully that'll help reduce things. But it's going to be a long time. It really will.
It is, but it sends the right message to your customer base as well. It sends the message of, look, we're taking cyber very seriously. Bank of New York Mellon, quite a few years ago, and for an old stuffy bank that Alexander Hamilton created for a really old bank, they put their CTO, I think her first name is Janet. I could be mistaken. That doesn't do her justice. I'll look it up when you're talking in case I got it wrong. But she's on the board. I thought that was really interesting. A CTO, I think CISO, certainly. Where do you think the CISO should report? Because it seemed obvious to me, it seemed obvious for years, that having CIO, CISO policing his or her boss. I mean, look, do you remember the Volkswagen debacle with the emissions inception in Latin America, right? It was 2016, I think, somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
So, right. So the background, ladies and gentlemen, is that Volkswagen were very, very bad. In Volkswagen Latin America, where they make their vehicles for the Americas and for the United States, they deceived the regulatory emissions protocol with a piece of software. Now, what was interesting about that, terrible decision on their part that so far cost them billions, so good, is that the CIO actually sourced a piece of legitimate software. So if you're the CISO, that's just a piece of software.
Right.
That's not malware, that's software. But there's criminal acts going on here. So there's two things happening here. One, the CISO shouldn't be reporting to the CIO. I've seen CISOs start to report to general counsel. That's kind of interesting because they're risk mitigators, general counsel, right? When you're dealing with law, you're dealing in risk. How much risk are we willing to take? So ultimately, general counsels, are dealing with. So that's interesting. Few CISOs reporting to CEOs, not much though, but mostly general counsel. But otherwise, it's still the technologist, the CIO.
Yeah.
So one thing. The other thing of that story with Volkswagen that it does, because it was a legitimate piece of software, is it the CISO's, or should it be the CISO's responsibility to also police for internal criminal activity? That's definitely the general counsel's job. But in the case of Volkswagen Latin America, the CISO, should that person be in a role where they are able to see things like that and stop it from happening? What are your thoughts around both those subjects? Where should the CISO report? How much more responsibility should we give you guys?
So, there needs to be, even if they don't report directly to the CEO or to the board, there needs to be some sort of at least method of communicating or reporting there, whether it's through committee or something to get to the CEO and to the board, if there's not a direct report. I've seen where also the CIO in some organizations, I think the state of Missouri did it for a little while, where the CIO became reporting to the CISO. And
you're gonna love my friend and colleague. That's exactly what he just commented.
Yeah, I see that now.
So, right? It's like, get on with it. Other way around, we're king now.
But anyway, it really depends on the relationship of the CISO and the CIO, and if they have a good working relationship. But there needs to be an escalation path for when there is disagreements. Oh, shoot, I forgot your other question off there.
And
you had the reporting and then...
Yeah, I will. I'll remind you. But Keely's jumping in on this as well. Thank you, Keely. He's saying that the CISO should not be a single point of entry or deception for the whole organization. Right. Yeah, you get that.
So basically, should the CISO look for insider threats is basically what, and that instance of where the Volkswagen, that's really an insider threat to the organization. Is really what that is. And I do look for that. That's what my fraud team's doing. They're looking for insider threats, but also the cyber team also looks for that. So they look for things, where they're exfiltrating data or something that maybe they shouldn't be because they're downloaded a customer list and then a week later they put in their notice and that sort of thing. So, both, yes, the CISO should be looking for that. And that also with the Volkswagen instance, that gets into business risk just as much as that could have been as a technology risk. And so, the whoever made that decision, hey, we should do this, and technology, you go find the way for us to do this, that should have been, a business risk that should